When we come to the question of why should we study faith, there's two answers right here in Hebrews chapter 11. The first is found in verse 6, and that is that without faith it's impossible to please God. And then the second answer is actually verse 2. For by it the men of old obtained a good report or a good testimony from God. And when we think about faith, to have God say of you or of I or of people in our lives, for God to give a testimony about us, just let that one kind of sink in. You know, we don't know a lot about heaven. Us trying to comprehend heaven would have been like trying to explain to the Manhattan Indians Roku. You know, can you imagine if you tried to explain to the Manhattan Indians what watching TV on Roku would be like? You say, well, brother, that'd be, now imagine for God to try and explain heaven to us. And you say, that's all right. Till I got a Roku, I didn't understand it. I couldn't figure out why they had an electronic device named 6 from the Japanese word Roku. And then someone said, oh, no, it's a different pronunciation over there, and it means something totally different. I said, well, okay. I said, I'm still confused why they call it Roku, but at least now I know how it works. I plug it in and make sure it has power and we're good. But imagine that gap on something as simple as television and internet versus sinful man and a totally sinless creation. But yet, in heaven, we will have a testimony from God. And not in the cliche way that we like to say sometimes at funerals. But I mean, genuinely and truly, if you had to answer the question right now, what would I like God to say about me to everyone else who will be in heaven? What would you, under your ideal, perfect day conditions, what would it be that you would want God to say? And, you know, and we looked at Abel. All Abel did was gave God the best of his sheep. That's it. But God, for 3,700 years of the Bible being in written form that we have record of, for 3,700 years, people know the story of Cain and Abel. And it permeates our society. I know everyone in here is a big WWE fan. Sunday night they had another pay-per-view. Tyler and I watched it. Tyler texted me and he said, XYZ character just quoted Genesis 4, where it says, and Cain rose up and slew Abel his brother. And then his opponent texted back 1 Peter 5:8, be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary the devil walks about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And he said, no, the fact that in something as simple as wrestling entertainment, that the story of Cain and Abel endures in a culture, the majority of whom don't actually crack Bibles, even though they have them in their house. How powerful is Abel's testimony? And it was because he did one act by faith that here we are 3,700 years later, and it's a part of our popular culture even. And so when we ask the question, what is the power of faith? I don't know, y'all. I think that's a pretty powerful thing. The guy made one sacrifice. You say, well, brother, I have no doubt he lived his life in faith on other things. But that sacrifice that he and his brother both were given direction by God to offer was the watershed point between two paths of ways to live on this entire planet. That one sacrifice set the tone until God destroyed everything under Noah. There were the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth. You say, what about descendants of Abel? He didn't have any kids. His younger brother Seth, though, his line was the first line that ever called upon the name of God after that incident. And so we have those two lineages. And then we look at verse 5. And if I can get someone to read 5 and 6 of Hebrews 11.
By faith Enoch was taken away so that he did not see death, and was not found, because God had taken him. For before he was taken, he had this testimony, that he pleased God. But without faith it is impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him.
All right. By faith, Enoch pleased God. Everything else in the middle is the commentary on that. By faith, Enoch pleased God, because without faith, it's impossible to please God. How many years did Enoch walk in faith with God? Who remembers? Did you say 10? 300. Okay, 300. I was going to go, no, higher, a bit higher, sister. 300. Now, subtract 300 from 2020. What year would that make us? Yeah, I promise, no trick questions tonight. No trick questions. 1720. And Enoch was already not young. Can you imagine from 1720 till now, living the life of faith? And you say, well, his world was different than ours. Yes, his world was a little bit better environmentally wise. His was the pre-flood world. But his world was just as wicked. If I can get someone to turn over to the book of Jude. I know that Enoch's world had to have trouble, because before the flood, I want you to see what Enoch prophesied about in Jude 14 and 15.
Now Enoch, the seventh from Adam, prophesied about these men, also saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000s of his saints, to execute judgment on all, to convict all who are ungodly, among them of all their ungodly deeds, which they have committed in an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him.
All right, that's a lot of ungodlies. It's a lot of ungodlies. But let that register. Enoch is taken shortly before Noah is born. Another 500 years will pass before Noah will have his kids. But from when Enoch started his walk of faith until Noah's kids were born, 800 years. But during that 300 years, Enoch prophesied about the second coming of Jesus against the ungodly to his world as a warning against their ungodliness. But for 300 years, in a world of ungodliness enough that God's message through Enoch was the second coming of his Messiah as a warning to them about impending judgment, Enoch stayed faithful. Why are you making a point of that? Let's say that we take if you were born and raised in your average Church of Christ up until about 20 years ago, most kids who grow up in most of our Sunday school programs up until about 20 years ago usually obeyed the gospel between 12 and 14 years old. Average lifespan, mid-70s. So really and truly, you only have to live 60 years basically faithful to Jesus in our world. Or 1/5 of the time of Enoch. Enoch lived 5 of our lifetimes of faith. And he so impressed God with his faith and faithfulness that God spared him the suffering of death as a consequence of his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's sin. And how much more you and I, that even though we will go through the passage of death, that we go through the passage of death with the blessing of Christ if we abide in the faith of Christ. We don't even have to get it as right as Enoch. But the power of faith that Enoch's life had was that God said, yeah, I'll just take you out of here without you even going through death. Thoughts, comments, or questions before we move on to Noah? And I ask this one question again. Name me one miracle that Abel or Enoch did that we have any record of. I'm glad Jesus said faith can move mountains. I'm glad Jesus said all it takes is mustard seed. The problem is, when he said that to people who their whole lifetime had been built on these heroes of faith that we read about, but they are not integral to our lives. And so when he said that to them, they knew the history of these people, because that had been their only focus in preparation for Messiah. And so they knew what faith could do in these, that in this long list, the only miracle worker that you and I will see, and you might argue with me a little bit about Gideon, but the only true miracle worker we will see in the list of Hebrews 11 is Moses. That's it. You realize David never did a miracle? No miracles for David. Abraham never did a single miracle. Neither did Isaac or Jacob. But their faith in being obedient to simple things is why we are here right now, today, reading about their lives. And I don't know, I think everybody understands how powerful that is. Guys from a region that most of us will never go to, who spoke a language that no one can technically speak, are the basis of everything on the planet. There's those that follow the God of Abraham, and there's those who follow against the God of Abraham. The entire planet shifts around Abraham, and because it shifts around Abraham, it also shifts around Jesus, because he's the fulfillment of the promise. That's how powerful their faith was. It set the agenda for the entire world. That's how powerful it is. And all they did was simple stuff. verse 6, without faith it's impossible to please him. We're going to come back to that one at various times. So if I get someone to read verse 7 of Hebrews 11.
By faith, Noah being warned by God about things not yet seen, in reverence, prepared an ark for the salvation of his household, by which he condemned the world and became an heir of the righteousness which is according to faith.
ESV or New American?
That is New American.
Okay. All right. Now put the word fear back in. Not reverence, fear. Fear has gotten a bad reputation. Fear, who understands fear can be good? Fear can be good. Noah, by faith, prepared an ark, saved his family. Now, by faith, what else? It was something that had not been seen before. Now, people can argue and they can go, well, I've heard the arguments that it never rained before the flood. Maybe, maybe not. I look at the bigger issue. What did God tell Noah? What do we know God told Noah?
Build an ark.
He told him build an ark because he was going to do what?
Floods.
That would cover and destroy the entire planet. Has anybody else ever seen the entire planet covered with water? Nope. Noah believed when God said that's what he was going to do. And we talked about this in the Twilight talk. Did anybody else ever see Heaven Almighty? Am I the only irreverential person that saw it? Okay, some of the rest of you admit it, all right? You know, in the movie Steve Carell, his little time in that movie went fairly quick on his ark building. And he was in a nice suburb there in Virginia outside of D.C., and the people mocked him. There's never been a flood up this high, not since the day of Noah. Oh, there's another flood coming. And can you imagine? Here you are in this huge flat river plain area. And you're making a barge the size of a football field, the shape of a box of Kleenex. That's basically the dimension and the shape of the ark. It's a big rectangular box. That's it. It had 3 stories, it had a door in it, and a window. And God said, make it out of gopher wood. I love the new translations, they put it acacia. You know why they put acacia? Because people got tired of trying to answer what's gopher wood. You know what gopher wood is? We have no clue. No clue. We have no clue what God said to make the ark out of. Because the word there ain't the same as the word everywhere else. And then he said, pitch it inside and outside with pitch. Thank you. Whoever said pitch, thank you. You know, it's kind of like the Lord, and thou shalt stone them with stones. You know? But I think God knew what America was going to have trouble with back then. Because when he says, thou shalt take them outside of the gates of the city, and that, you know, until they are stoned. I think that's why he told us, thou shalt stone them with stones. Because he knew what America would be like. Pitch it within, pitch it without with pitch. And we know God gave him some other instructions. He's 500 years old when he has Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Everyone else had been having their kids anywhere between 60 and 110. He has his 3 boys late. And every indication is that, you know, all 3 boys came out at the same time, that they're the first triplets. Because there's no difference in their ages ever recorded. And so the last 100 years of the pre-flood world, that's when God lets Noah's boys be born. And even one of those boys goes into the new world with what? The contamination of the old. But God kept Noah's boys till the last possible minute for their own sake. But Noah had genuine fear. And someone, no, brother, we shouldn't have fear. You should have fear. This same book of Hebrews is going to tell us two things. It already told us one of them in chapter 10. Now, true or false, it's a terrible thing to fall into the hands of the living God.
Yes.
True or false, our God is a consuming fire. True. If not for the blood of Christ, we'd all be in big trouble. And so, oh, but I've got the blood of Jesus, so I can be cavalier. No. Have godly fear. Recognize, just like with Noah, recognize that there's stuff that's coming. And you say, but brother, shouldn't we be motivated by love? If every decision you've ever made in your life was from the place of godly, perfect love, lived, manifested, and motivated just like Jesus' love, raise your hand. You say, well, when you put those qualifiers, right. Our goal as Christians is to move to that place in our motives and everything else that we are motivated by Christ-like love. We get there by meditating on Christ and doing what Christ says and all that. But sometimes, is fear healthy? Yeah. Noah had godly fear. He believed God was going to save him and his family, and he believed that God was going to do something that no one had ever seen. And he did not want to be on the receiving end of why he was preparing the ark, and that helped give him extra motivation in building that thing. And you say, no, that was it. He took God at his word that God was going to do what God said. And so as a consequence, by faith, he built. And who understands this is not works? You know, sometimes we have this challenge. People go, well, Noah, it was by works. No, Noah didn't do it by works. Was Noah saved by faith? Did God give Noah grace for him to be saved by faith? Okay. What would you say was the grace he gave him, Brother Tommy? If you don't mind my asking.
He gave him what he needed to get to the next place.
Okay.
He was already in the big plan.
Okay.
And he gave him enough mind to take the fear and the trust and put it together.
Okay. Now I haven't been up to the Noah's Ark Museum up in Kentucky. That thing, I forget, was like $20 million, and it took way longer to build than what they thought. I want you to see some areas of grace. First of all, I believe the story happened the way it's written. Okay? You said, no, that's me accepting it by faith. I've read the other stories out there. The Bible's is the best one that makes the most sense. I believe God graced Noah with knowledge on how to build a seaworthy boat that could endure a year out at sea and the first month and a half of tempestuous waves and swells and everything else. The ark was way bigger than the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. If you aren't a boat builder to build a boat, I believe God graced him with divine knowledge on how to do that, or at least how to superintend it. I believe God probably graced Noah with the financial resources to hire the work crews to get this project done. Because Noah didn't build it by himself. You say, well, maybe God gave Noah miracle power to just speak to trees and assemble it randomly. Okay. But he still had to give him the knowledge of how to speak to trees and randomly assemble it, so it wasn't random. God had to bring the animals. You realize God never told Noah to go get the animals. Now, my Sunday school teachers, I know y'all know that. It says what? God brought him the animals, and then God said, here's how you load them. 7 pair of the clean, 2 by 2 in their pairs, and then the 2 pairs of the uncleans. Load them up. And God did those things, and God had those things in motion, and God had a plan for all that. But until Noah, by faith, moved in preparing the ark, none of those other pieces could God start to move in response to it. The grace of God was already there for Noah's deliverance and all of the things he would need. But till Noah activated it by being obedient and picking up his mallet and going and, striking the first stake in the ground to get ready to start to frame this thing up, there was nothing for God to work with his grace. But all that grace was there, and the moment Noah moved in faith, all of that grace came to his benefit. And he did save his family, and he did condemn the world. And how did he condemn the world? By faith. What is the one thing where we know that God will frequently change his mind? This is about the only place where you and I can show from Scripture where God will change his mind.
Through our prayers, petitions to him.
Okay.
Situations where he's done. Through repentance.
Okay.
Changed his mind several times when people repented or cities repented.
He was going to destroy the Israelites, and Moses asked him to change his mind.
Okay. So here's the one area. When he has the opportunity to show mercy, he'll change his mind toward mercy. When Abram prayed for Sodom and Gomorrah, we remember he started out at how many? 50. Lord, if there's 50 righteous people. And you got to wonder if Abraham was like, oh, wait, man, I've been to the city. No, there ain't 50. 45. And long before there were Jews, Abraham Jewed the Lord down to 10. That's why it's not racial to say that, because Jews didn't exist then, all right? He got him down to 10. How low would the Lord have probably gone for the sake of mercy with someone who was in faith and in the promise and blessing to make intercession? How low would he probably have gone? 1 or 0? I figure I'm always been a fan of stopping at 1, because 2 Peter chapter 2 tells us Lot was righteous and his conscience was vexed every day. As Noah acted in faith and the world continued to move against faith, Noah's faith in and of itself condemned him. As a witness that it was possible to have faith and they chose not to. That was the condemnation of Noah's faith. That was the condemnation. Because it was possible to follow God in that world with all of its troubles and to still be obedient and loyal to God. And for 3 centuries before Noah was even born, his great-grandpa, great-great-great-great-grandpa, warned them about coming judgment, and by faith they wouldn't hear Enoch. And when Noah began building this thing by faith, they would not believe it. And Noah's faith condemned them because it was possible and they chose not to. And so Noah becomes the father of the new world. And that's why the same blessing in Genesis 1 is almost identical to the same blessing in Genesis 9 for Noah's children. But notice that God still has a blessing in both instances. Thoughts, comments, or questions on Noah, or Enoch, or Abel?
Why did he take Enoch?
Because he pleased him.
So did Noah.
Noah was found righteous in his generation, but God had a different intention for Noah. Enoch, if I had to give an answer, Ronnie, Methuselah, technically longest lived. Methuselah and Lamech both died the same year of the flood. Noah's righteous in his generation. That doesn't mean he was the only righteous person on earth. I believe Methuselah and Lamech were both righteous. Enoch fulfilled his purpose, and Enoch lived a faithful life, and he pleased God. Noah was found pleasing, you're right, and that was why God did choose him out of his generation to be the one upon whom he would rebuild the entire earth. And
how close did Enoch live to the flood?
you remember, Jen, what was it, about 675 years. Jen and I, because in that discombobulation of the year of this and the year of that, and I had it wrong one time. Okay. It was last year I had it wrong. All right, so it doesn't count for this year. All right, it goes on last year's mistake tally. I had it wrong that Enoch overlapped Noah by like 25 or 75 years. I had that wrong. From Enoch's start until the flood, Ronnie, is from his time where he started walking righteous with God till the flood, is probably about 975 years, give or take.
He died before the flood. I mean, he didn't die.
Yeah, he didn't die. His son Methuselah is 969.
And probably died in the flood.
I think he died right before the flood. I don't think God destroyed him in the flood, because all of that line is the line of the righteous. So I think God killed Methuselah and Lamech, because Lamech was 777. Do what?
There's 8 righteous souls saved in the ark.
8 righteous, well, no. A few people, that is 8, because we know what? Ham was definitely not righteous.
Not later.
The righteousness is always attached to Noah. So I mean, from the start of Enoch till the flood, probably about 950, 975 years. From the time Enoch's taken, about 650, 675. Because there's a little bit of gap between Enoch's disappearance and the birth of Noah, but not a lot. Not a lot.
But for some reason, God chose to take Enoch so that he would not experience death.
Yeah. And, and that's, the only thing we can say is what the scripture says. He pleased him. How pleasing was Enoch to God? Pleasing enough that God let him skip death. The only other person that God ever let skip the physical passage of earthly death is Elijah. And again, Elijah, great man of faith. Now, he's not in this list, but he's in James 5. And so, but Noah was found righteous in his generation. Noah pleased God in his generation. And God decided to spare Noah and his family. And that's one of those interesting things in Scripture. True or false, Jacob's kids were pretty much all bad. Jacob's. Other than Joseph and Benjamin.
Yeah, pretty much.
Pretty much. He said, well, brother, no. When 10 of the 11 brothers, and the only one who doesn't plot to kill you is your younger brother, he's back at home. When your brothers all plot to kill you, and then they lie against another brother and all sell you into slavery, you're all bad. And then they lie to their father for nearly 25 years. And they watch their father go through grief. We won't get into the sins of Judah and Reuben. They were real bad. And you got to love Levi and Simeon. Now, I like Levi and Simeon. After their sister is raped, they say, cut a deal, Pop. Tell all the men of the city that if they'll all get circumcised, we'll let them marry our sister. And then they go in on the third day when they're all in pain, and Levi and Simeon and their men, they destroy the entire city. And Jacob says, why'd you do that? And they said, you weren't going to do our sister that way, sir. No, sir. You will not do our sister that way. I like Levi and Simeon. Dude takes your sister out in the field, and then he wants to cut a business deal to keep her as his wife after he... No. This is one of those things that we don't talk about, Ronnie, in the churches of Christ, because it's uncomfortable. If God decides to bless you and puts a blessing upon you, there are good things that come to you in spite of your own mistakes and failures. And as we move into Abraham, Abraham's a good case in point. Abraham will make huge mistakes. But because he kept doing stuff in faith and being obedient with what he had, the blessing of God remains upon him, even with his mistakes. And but that's why Noah's family was saved, Ronnie. It wasn't because his boys were all good. At least one of them was definitely bad, and from every indication, the other one wasn't that great. Shem was the only one that was actually good out of the three. And if we take timelines right, Shem was probably Melchizedek.